Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, April 30th, 2018. It's Gold, Goats, and Guns half hour here on YouTube. I hope everybody's had a great weekend. Got a lot to talk about, as always. For those of you who are new, you can follow my work over at goldgoatsandguns.com. Behind you. And you can follow my blog there. You can also sign up for my Patreon if you really like the work. I have a Patreon service as well. For either do the tip jar $1, you can do $4 a month. Private blog and community, and you can do $12 a month for the Gold, Goats, and Guns investment newsletter, where I tie all of the geopolitics and headlines of the day into a coherent, crisis-resistant portfolio strategy. At least, that's what I hope. Well, actually, I'm relatively successful with it. We cover geopolitics, daily politics, cryptocurrencies, gold, markets, bonds, everything else. So let us get started for the morning. I'm gonna make sure I've got the chat available. Morning to those of you who are already here. Let's get started. So last night, the big news of the morning is last night's attack on Syria. And I am, it's funny, after Friday's historic outbreak of peace on the Korean Peninsula, which I'm convinced the United States foreign policy establishment is not happy about. Okay. Donald Trump may be happy about it, but the foreign policy establishment is not. John Bolton's already out there over the weekend trying to throw water on the situation. The Koreans are trying to position this in such a way as to give Trump the most amount of credit in order to prep the stage for now how they're going to proceed with Iran. Because this has always been, North Korea has always been a prelude. Problem you solve first. You solve North Korea first, and then you can go solve Iran, because they're linked at the hip in terms of their nuclear programs. Or at least that is the prevailing wisdom in Washington. It is the prevailing wisdom certainly in Israel. And this morning, we see exactly what we can expect between now and May 12th's announcement by Trump to decertify the Iran nuclear. And I'll tell you the reasons. I'll tell you why. Okay, so last night there was a major attack on Iranian forces stationed in Syria. Measured the explosion measured 2.6 on the Richter scale. There were conflicting reports as to who was behind it, what happened, and everything else. I'll throw out some of those things this morning. So it could have easily been Thomas Wictor is out there saying it was a commando raid, that it wasn't an airstrike, which is we're going to get to Thomas Wictor in just a minute, and hope and I want this spread far and wide. He is a Saudi disinformation agent. Last night's thread, which I have linked in the show notes below, should tell you everything you need to know about that. It starts off with 7 tweets that are just absolute Saudi propaganda, period. Because they're counterfactual, and now all of a sudden these are articles that have been seeded into the news after Mohammed bin Salman's charm tour across the United States and across the West to try and absolve the Saudis' behavior towards Qatar, the GCC, Iran, and everybody. It's complete and utter fucking nonsense. And that guy's a complete LARPer. Doesn't know his ass from the hole in the ground. I think he's functionally insane, to be honest. But I've got even more to say about him later on. But let's talk about what actually happened. So it was either a commando raid of some form or another. It was an Israeli airstrike. It was an American airstrike. Some people believe it was a Moab that was dropped, a mother of all bombs, because of the size of the explosion. I don't think so. I think they hit an ammo dump, and the size of the ammo dump and the size of the explosion and whatnot, consistent with having hit an underground ammo dump. Perfectly, that fits the facts well enough. The question is why and how and the timing. Okay, with peace breaking out in Korea. I'm going to speak with Halsey English tomorrow night about this very subject. I'm going to speak about Israel in specific with Halsey English tomorrow night on his show, Halsey Live, probably 9 o'clock. I don't have a link right now, but we will. You can follow my Twitter feed. It'll get reposted there. And eventually the show will show up on my blog over Gold Goats and Bell, because this one's important. I talked to him last night or yesterday afternoon before the strike actually happened. I said, it's time for you and I to seriously sit down and have a long talk about Israel. I want your perspective on it, because I'm beginning to get significant pushback from people about my anti-Semitism, because I'm willing to be critical of it. This morning, I'm going to be critical of Israel, which is going to be further proof that I'm an anti-Semite. I can't do anything about it. All I can do is report what I see and the facts and everything. So User 13 posts up, Korea is the reason they're ramping up the Iranian insanity. Exactly, and this is what I'm about to say. Of course, User 13 is incredibly astute. She and I are friends for a long time. So what happens here is that with the North Koreans coming in out of the cold and effectively, the West is trying to sell this as they're suing for peace, which the Koreans had a nuclear weapon or have a nuclear weapon, declared themselves a nuclear weapon. And then once the leverage over them was gone, the United States was willing to negotiate. That's reality. That's the most reasonable, that is the most reasonable interpretation of the facts as we know them. Because the United States does not negotiate if it's in charge of the situation. It does not negotiate. It does not come to the negotiating table if there's any reason to if there's any doubt. They will continue to, we will always and forever push the situation to its breaking point, if not further. The Korean Peninsula being divided has been U.S. policy for the last 70 years. It's what we've wanted. We have never wanted Korea to be reunified. And it's never been, it's always been this way. North Korea is a creation of U.S. foreign policy. So why would the U.S. foreign policy establishment be willing to sit down and discuss peace now unless something is fundamentally changed? This is, again, why people like Thomas Wictor are absolute disinformation agents for the Saudis, the Israelis, and everybody else who's opposed to this process taking place. Okay, opposed to these geopolitical situations changing. Okay, because, and as I said on Friday or Saturday, and as I've said, and I said on my blog, the Koreans are the ones driving this. Both Kim by developing a nuclear weapon, and the South Koreans by wanting reunification. And South Korean President Moon Jae-in has been very smart in his diplomacy by giving Trump as much credit as possible. Not because Trump deserves all the credit, but because it's good optics, because the South Koreans want this to succeed, and the best way for it to succeed is to appeal to Trump's vanity, to appeal to Trump's true and honest desire to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, and get a deal done. It makes perfect sense. It doesn't mean that he believes that Donald Trump was instrumental in making this happen in the way that the pro-Trump or the MAGA crowd wants to believe it. It's much more complicated and nuanced than simply Trump put his foot on the North Koreans and stomped on them and they surrendered. They didn't surrender. They won. They stood up to the world's most. They stood up to both China and Korea and the United States. Played both of them off of each other, and is going to wind up getting the best deal they possibly can. Now the rest of it from here on out, it's all diplomacy. It's all diplo speaking. But the reality is that the military situation changed. Now, so with that said, let's talk about Iran. Let's talk about why Israel is freaking out and why they're pushing this situation to its crisis point. It makes perfect sense at this point. Okay? With North Korea settled, and with the supposed or with the expected dismantling of the Korean nuclear program, that also means the dismantling of the Iranian nuclear program. Now, today, we have a report that's on the Durin. I've got the link down below. That the Israelis say the Iranians have an 80,000 person strong Shiite and Iranian militia in South Damascus, ready to attack the Golan Heights. Does anybody believe that? With anybody with 4 working brain cells believe that? The only people who could possibly believe that are people who are so far down the neocon narrative path that they would believe the Iranians are that stupid. They're not that stupid. No one's that stupid. The Iranians have been in Syria to wipe out ISIS. Yes, of course they have a secondary desire to strengthen Hezbollah and counter the Israelis. The question is, who do you believe is the aggressor here? The Israelis and the Americans and the Saudis, or the Iranians and Hezbollah? Everybody's an aggressor at some level. So the real question is, it's not even a matter of who started it or who's the aggressor or anything else. The truth of the matter is that who's got the most power? And the Saudi-Iranian U.S. alliance has the most power. They've been the most belligerent. They have been the biggest obstacles to peace in Syria. The idea that you know that Wictor, for example, is a Saudi disinformation agent when he posts up why it's so important that this article that came out in some Arabian newspaper yesterday saying that Iran has been blackmailing Qatar for the last 3 years, and that's why they've been supporting terrorism, which is complete fucking nonsense. I can't believe anybody would even buy that as it's complete nonsense. The Qataris, the Saudis, the Israelis, the Americans, the Jordanians, and the Turks all wanted a piece of the friggin' pipeline pie across Syria. Martin asks, I'll get back to my original point in a second. I just wanted to address Martin's point quickly. Martin Han asks, do you think the Korean peace talks were signed that the cabal/deep state losing its grip? Just curious to see what you think about it. I do. I absolutely do. They're apoplectic as to what's going on. But I'll go into more detail about that in a little bit. Let's go back to this whole Saudi disinformation thing. The idea that Qatar is being bribed by Iran to back Shiite militia groups in northern Syria is fiction. They were backing Al-Qaeda in the first part of the Syrian war. They saw that the Russian intervention starting in 2015 turned the tide of the war immediately. And the Qataris, who are the biggest cockroaches in the Middle East, immediately saw what was happening, bought a 20% stake in Rosneft to get the Russians off their back, and then immediately started negotiating with the Iranians to develop the North Pars gas field, which they both have a 50% interest in, to bring a pipeline into Europe through Iran and then Turkey. What the fuck is Wictor talking about? It's the fucking dumbest thing I've ever heard. I mean, it's really dumb. Joanne Leon says her theory is that Trump has actually made the decision not to scrap the Iran nuclear deal in favor of Macron's 4 pillars deal, which won't work, by the way. And this is Israel's panicked response. That's an interesting take. I'm not sure I agree with it, but I'm certainly willing to entertain it. It may be possible that Trump can't scrap the Iran nuclear deal because he knows that at that point everything ratchets up. At that point, the Russians move S-300s into Syria and double down on their support of the Assad government, and and our position there becomes completely untenable. Because what's the response going to be if he decertifies the nuclear deal? Iran is immediately going to take on a much stronger, much more aggressive position. So the chat's getting very interesting. It's actually almost more interesting than I was going to say. So, which is awesome to see that breaking out here in Gold, Goats, and Guns. So, but the idea that Qatar was being bribed by Iran in order to get like these 25 political prisoners back is complete fiction. Complete fiction. Are you kidding me? They wouldn't be negotiating a major gas deal, which has been frozen in geopolitical time for years, decades, because of the petrodollar and this, that, and everything. It's all nonsense. Qatar makes most of its money from China. China and Iran are in an effective alliance at this point. That's, who the biggest customer Qatar has for its LNG, right? Which it's the biggest exporter of in the world, by the way. It's China. The whole point of this whole exercise with Iran is to break up, is to try and cleave off either Russia or China from Iran and then isolate it so they can be destroyed. It's not going to happen. The Russians have made this abundantly clear. So what happens if, so all of this is nonsense. So the idea that anything that comes out of Thomas Wictor's mouth about Saudi Arabia and its maneuverings in Syria are complete fiction. The man's a complete and utter John Bolton-esque neocon that just wants to see Iran wiped off the face of the planet. That's it. And any other discussion of that, of what he thinks is happening, is complete bullshit. Because actually, he's right. World War III isn't going to break out, but it's not going to be because of Donald Trump's 17-dimensional chess brilliance. It's going to be because the Russians and the Chinese have the hammer, multiple hammers. The Russians have missile defense and EW military hammer, and the Chinese have economic hammers. Iran is being pushed to its breaking point at this point because, one, it's ditched the dollar completely in all of its trade. Its oil trade has been completely de-dollarized by legislative fiat. They now will take euros, rubles, yuan, or anything else, but they won't take any dollars whatsoever. And why should they? And this is creating panic in the marketplaces. And you'll see it in the headlines that the Iranian rial is going through complete hyperinflation. Well, because it's going through hyperinflation versus the dollar. Sure, it's becoming worthless versus the dollar because there's no trade between the two currencies. And when that happens, it doesn't matter. It's like quoting the Russian ruble US dollar exchange rate. It's not really all that important, except to American investors thinking about buying Russian assets and calculating their potential return on investment. That's it. Because the Russian economy is mostly de-dollarized at this point. Other than Rusal, which has been solved by Trump's own sanctions policy, and which the Bank of Russia will backstop now that Oleg Deripaska no longer is going to sell off a major stake and no longer be the majority shareholder of Rusal. You'll see the Bank of Russia come in and support Rusal. They have plenty of foreign exchange reserves. They have plenty of dollars to do this with. It's not a big deal. I mean, it's seriously not. They're literally the only major Russian state-owned enterprise or, fascist enterprise that needs to be bailed out along this line. Gazprom certainly has almost $0 denominated debt. So does Rosneft. And, DNK and the other Russian oil majors. I can't think of them off the top of my head. Sorry, but yeah, I mean, none of these companies anymore have significant dollar-denominated debt, and therefore they don't have to sell their oil in dollars in order to service their debt and service them in rubles or euros or anything else. It doesn't really matter. So, and I have a lot of verbiage in the upcoming issue of the Gold, Goats, and Guns investment newsletter about this stuff, and about how North Korea ties to Iran and ties very strongly into Russia and Gazprom, which is incredibly important at this point. And why the U.S. foreign policy establishment is freaking out over North Korea, and why they're trying to salvage something in Iran, and why the Israelis are freaking out because they're not sure what's going to happen next. I know I just chatted with Halsey yesterday in preparation for this upcoming chat we're going to have tomorrow night, and he said to me, Tom, I think you give the Israelis too much credit that they actually have a strategic plan. Really? Like, yeah, he's like, I almost think that they're just abreacting to a situation that they don't understand anymore because everything's in such flux. And so they're blindly lashing out. So this is why we have this fever dream of a story this morning that's out there that there's 80,000 Shiite militia pointed at Damascus. Moreover, that Netanyahu tonight, or Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tonight, is going to inform the world that the Syrians and the Iranians have been working on a nuclear weapon in Syria, and this is why we need to go bomb them. This is what's coming. Okay, this is where they're going to take this. I don't think it's going to work. I think this is going to get pushed all the way to its brink. I think Trump understands. He thinks he can push the Iran nuclear deal around. I know there's some counter arguments being made out there that Iran's being the bully. There was a terrible article at the Durham yesterday about how Iran is actually the bully in all this because they haven't upheld their end of the agreement. There's so many loopholes in the JCPOA that they can make themselves look like they're not pursuing nuclear weapons and complying with the deal while they actually are, which is all, that is literally nonsense. Okay. The main way that Iran was pursuing a nuclear weapon was through its partnership with North Korea. Okay. So to think that they don't have that information now and they can't spin this back up immediately if they pull out of the Iran nuclear deal is crazy. Of course they can. Moreover, the Americans still haven't fully implemented their side of the deal. And you see, and you got to remember that if Trump pulls out of this nuclear deal, do you think, and Liz Sandy is asking, do you think the North Korea nuke test site is a factor, leaking, and Kim needs help with that? I think that North Korea. See, okay, Liz, you make a really good point. Let me talk about what I think actually happened there. So that mountain collapsed a couple of months ago, which was the North Korean nuclear test facility. There's two main potential observations about that. One is that the mountain collapsed after they were doing their feverish testing to try and finish their weapon, and then the thing collapsed on them by mistake because the North Koreans are incompetent communists, which fits the narrative, by the way. And they lost all of their scientists, and they have to sue for peace because they don't have a nuclear program anymore because it just got imploded. Or, and this is what I think happened, they have a design lock nuke, and they detonated it under the mountain to let everybody know, fuck you. We're done. We won. We got there first. Now, let's look at what's happened since then and what fits the narrative, what fits the facts better. Scenario 1, where the North Koreans are incompetent, or scenario 2, where the North Koreans have a weapon now. The implosion of the test site, that mountain, is absolutely key to the understanding why this has all become so important. Now, sure, Trump put pressure on everybody. Sure, he deserves credit for all of this. But understand that, again, it may not have worked. Once you put ultimate pressure on somebody, and then you don't go through with it. Look, when you use the nuclear option, when you use your nuclear weapon, whatever it is, whatever that nuclear weapon is, that ultimate weapon you have, in financial terms, it's cutting people out of the SWIFT system. And it doesn't matter what it is. It's you bring your queen out and go, all right, I'm coming. And you don't use it. You threaten with a queen and then you don't follow through. You don't have a gambit. You don't have a play. Your bluff has been called. What do you do then? Look, it's like, Trump's playing poker. He's a poker player. He's not a chess player. Guys, he doesn't do 4D chess. He does poker. He's a no-limit hold'em player. That man will go, and on every flop, he will show that he's got the nuts. Every time. The art of the deal is all about showing that you've got the nuts on every hand. All the time. And then playing it for as much, and betting hard the entire time. Well, a savvy player understands that kind of riverboat gambling, eventually you have to call them. Like, you have to call them. You may go, you may call them wrong. They may be bluffing 50% of the time. And it's coin flip as to whether or not the hand that you bluff them on is the right one to bet, is the right one to call their bluff on. But you have to call them. One player at a table of 12 has to call the crazy Ivan guy, right? The Gus Hansen guy. If you guys ever watch a lot of poker, you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. It's Gus Hansen. He plays every freaking hand. And he plays everything he's got short of 2-7 offsuit. And I haven't even seen him play that, for fuck's sake. Like Doyle Brunson would play, the Brunson is the 2-10, right? Man, won the World Series, the World Series of Poker twice with the 210, with I think it was 210 suited. Okay, like one of the 3 worst hands possible. Donald Trump plays like that, but eventually somebody at the table has to call the bluffer, and when they do, if they catch them in a bluff, their entire strategy then falls apart, and they now have to change tactics. Donald Trump has one tactic: maximum pressure, maximum pressure, maximum pressure. Bet, 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 bet. Overplay your hand, bet your hand, bet the pot, double, bet pot, bet pot, bet pot. That's all he does. And then dare somebody to call him. The North Koreans just called him. They called him, guys. And it's okay that he got called. There's nothing wrong with getting called. Now you negotiate. So what's going on with Iran? Iran is that Israel doesn't like the fact that Donald Trump just got called and they don't know what to do. So the chat's very interesting. So Iran likely has to judge how far they can push and keep Russian/Chinese support. Very true. If they have it, absolutely, then you want Trump to pull out of the deal and put the onus on dealing with the deal on Israel. This is one of the commenters. It's a very astute comment. And that's what Trump is trying to do, right? He's trying to find out just how far the Russians and the Chinese are willing to back Iran. What's the breaking point? I would say, given the situation, they have to back Iran as far as they can possibly. They have to back Iran to the point of nuclear war. But they will take body blow after body blow after body blow in service of it. The Iranians are not going to strike back here. They won't. The Iranians will be happy to leave Syria if they can secure no regime change from the United States. And so the counter move here for the Russians is to simply continue to move more war material and S-300s, possibly S-400s, into Syria and begin opening talks. Talks are not going to occur until after Trump and Kim have their summit and after the decision about the Iran nuclear deal takes place. Period. Nothing is going to happen in the next 3 weeks other than Israel trying to push the narrative as far as they can in their direction. And Iran's best move is to not listen, is to not react. The Russians are not going to react. I'm out. I was reading a bunch of articles this morning, went over to places like RT and Russia Insider and other places. Not really to read the articles, but to read the reactions to the articles. I want to see how many people are calling Putin a traitor this morning for not responding immediately. Yep. So the best thing for Iran to do is to not react, because it now makes Israel look like the aggressor. It makes Israel look like they're the ones losing support in the international community. And that's the only way Iran is going to get through. They cannot strike back in any other than rhetorically. They can, say all the things that they want to say. And as long as we're at the rhetoric stage, it doesn't matter. Right? This is one of those things where everybody has to remind themselves that diplomatic rhetoric is irrelevant. What matters is actions. And at this point in time, the Americans and the Israelis look like the aggressors. And that's the game they're playing in every way. And the Russians and the Iranians and the Chinese are looking like the peacemakers. They're the ones looking and asking for peace and wondering when it is that we're going to get peace. So it's really the best play. And it's a shame that things have to go to this point. It's a shame that hundreds of people are going to continue to lose their lives. Don't kid yourself. There will be Israelis killed by Iranians. It just will not be in cathartic military strikes on Tel Aviv. That's not happening. Okay, the Iranians know that they can't strike Tel Aviv. The Israelis know that they have some impunity to operate over Syria, and that the Russians will allow them to do a certain amount. And the Russians are coldly calculating in this respect, and how many people that how many times they can be punched in the mouth before they have to do something substantial. Also remember that the time is running out simply from a logistics standpoint. If the Russians continue to drop war material in to Syria and further upgrade and support the Assad government, it's only a matter of time before the Syrian airspace is closed off to Israel. There comes a point where Israel is going to lose another plane or two, and then all of this collapse, all of this bullying on their part collapses. Because once the invincibility of the Israeli Air Force has been punctured, it's optics. And that is an incredibly important point. The Israelis make a very big deal about the quality of their pilots, the fact that they never lost a plane up until a couple of months ago. Then all of a sudden they lost a plane, and they bent over backwards to explain to the world that no, it wasn't our fault. It was a unique set of circumstances, and it'll never happen again. Okay, then why are you so worried about the S-300s coming into Syria? If your pilots are that good, if your people are that good, if your Air Force is that well trained, the F-16I is such a great plane. And why are you so worried about the S-300 being given to Syria? Again, the Russians look like the peacemakers by refusing to escalate. And they understand that S-300s are a red line for the Israelis. And all it takes is for the invincibility of the Israeli Air Force to be punctured, and everything changes. And now you start seeing people sue for peace, because you don't have any other option at that point. So again, you can only push things so far, and then eventually you have to take whatever deal's on the table for you. I have been saying for 3 years, since the day the Russians, almost 3 years, the 2.5 years, the day the Russians invaded Syria, I said this will go down in history as the day in which the United States this will be the day that marks the peak of the United States' ability to project power overseas. I said this in my newsletter, which I literally wrote that for that month, that day, when I was working for Newsmax. And I know there's some people who follow me who read that issue, and my editor was all over me about it. She's like, "Are you sure about this?" I'm like, "Absolutely. This is the day that somebody finally stands up to the United States and goes civil disobedience." No, DTF, it was not an S-300 that shot down the commercial airliner. I don't even believe that it was in Ukraine. You're talking about MH17. I'm almost positive that was an air-to-air intercept, not a Buk or anything else. The best information I've heard about MH17 out of Ukraine was that it was a false flag operation with an air-to-air intercept. Whether it was false flag or just an honest mistake from a Ukrainian Air Force pilot. The conventional story is that it was a Buk. That's not possible, because the Buk systems that the Donbass had, that the rebels in the Donbass had at that moment in time, aside from the fact that it was shot down over Ukrainian airspace. Oh, by the way, and there's been all sorts of like horseshit backfilling since then to say that the Donbass that the rebel, the LPR or the DPR were actually operating in that area of Ukraine at the time, and all this. It's the same LARPy bullshit that Wictor was posting about. Qatar being bribed by Iran. All that's all disinformation bullshit. The Bukes that the DPR had at the time, I would say it's Donetsk or either the DPR LPR forces had at the time, couldn't reach that plane. It was flying too high. Now the anti-missile systems that the Ukrainian Air Force had could reach that high. But I have read multiple reports from inspectors who have looked at the wreckage and looked at everything else, I said this was an air-to-air intercept. So yes, the official line is that it was a Buke fired by the opposition. That's complete and utter nonsense. That's been debunked 18 ways from Sunday, and yet the West continues to stick to a narrative that they can't defend. Kind of like chemical weapons attack in Duma and Khan Shaykhun, and the one from 2013, which I can't remember where it occurred. Okay, so this, the truth is not what's important here. The narrative is what's important. Now, the Israelis are going to now concoct the most ridiculous anti-Iran narrative that they can come up with in order, and that tells you that they are now desperate. Okay, because look, first rule of screenwriting. I've said this in many Periscopes in the past. I'm going to say it here now. First rule of screenwriting is that you have to up the stakes on your protagonist. And whoever the protagonist in your story is, the audience loses its interest in the story if the stakes don't continually rise as the story goes along. So there's got to be a rising amount of stake. So now let's talk about, and I've been saying this for years about global warming, why I fundamentally was skeptical of global warming before I ever looked at the data. And I've looked at the data, and the data's horseshit. And I'm a data guy. I'm a former research chemist. I have literally spent more time looking at the data sets than 99% of the people who claim to know anything about fucking global warming. And I can tell you that the numbers are complete bullshit. Aside from the fact that the data sets have been massaged and to hell and back again. So aside from that, that's a big red flag. But the reason I was always skeptical of global warming, just from a narrative perspective, why it always just like, I said, nah, this is because it was a means by which to extend the argument in favor of Marxism and collectivism, even the progressive argument, or whatever you want to call it. Because look, right after the Soviet Union failed and the Berlin Wall fell, and everybody's looking around going, I thought communism was going to work, and everybody looked around and said, communism's dead. Chinese have given up on it. The Soviet Union just imploded. Things are worse than we ever thought that they could possibly be once people got in there to see what was going on. Global Marxism had a problem. Global government as a concept had a fundamental problem. They had a narrative problem. What's the next thing you do? You take environmentalism to the next level. It's not one thing to destroy the air or the water or the this or that. Now you're going to destroy the fucking planet. And it became that next. That's why we have to unify everybody under one system in order to be able to defend the planet from the virus of humans. That has been the fundamental argument, philosophically, undergirding global warming for 30 years now. Since the fall of the, 30 years now. Since almost 30 years. The Israelis are doing the same thing over Iran. The threat posed by Iran is now going to become existential to Israel's survival and to the survival of the world, because they have nuclear weapons. It's the only thing you can do. If you, narratively speaking, you have to take things to its crisis point. And Trump did this with North Korea. This is what the whole maximum pressure argument, that's the narrative you concoct. And so you take it to its crisis point, and then you negotiate. You're out of the deal. And either the deal comes together or it falls apart. Someone's bought this call. The Israelis are doing that right now. I've never seen anything like this. I've seen a lot of things out of the Israelis. And I mean, I'm not even, this is not a value judgment. Okay, this is not a criticism. This is just an observation. This is what they are doing. They feel justified in doing this. Okay? Iran is a threat to their existence. I make no bones about this. The Palestinians and the Arabs are a threat to their existence. I make no bones about this. I want to see a grand bargain in the Middle East. I've been arguing that that's what Trump and Putin have been working for behind the scenes for over a year and a half. I was probably the first guy in public to say it. The day Trump went to Saudi Arabia, I said it. Go find my blog. Go read it. I said it. I'm happy to see radical peace break out around the world. Anarcho-libertarian. Dude, I want peace. Question is, are we gonna get it? There are too many people who profit from war. There are too many people who don't believe that the path to peace comes through any other means than wiping out somebody else. Creating another Holocaust of some form or another. In this case, Iran. Wiping the Persians off the map. And I fundamentally believe that there's certain people in the foreign policy establishment in the UK, France, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel who believe this. The question is whether or not they're in charge of policy. I certainly hope they aren't. It certainly looks like they are. "15 people watching this right now. Who disagrees with me? Who disagrees with that assessment? I mean, this is not about chest thumping and bullying and all the other crap. This like, oh, my Trump, it's not about that. It's about reality, which is that if you do this wrong, it's a mess. So we're at 41 minutes. I should probably go soon, but the last thing to talk about is, the consequences of Trump, 86ing the Iran nuclear deal. I'm really torn as to what the fallout will be from this. Joanne gave me something to think about earlier, and it's been bothering me now in the back of my head for the last 20 minutes while I rant, while I sit here and think about and try and chew on that and see if it's actually viable or not. I don't know. I think that they're putting the fear of fiery retribution into Iran, and the question is whether Iran's going to stand tall. So, the markets certainly aren't scared, guys, about any of this. Go look at the markets. No one is handicapping this. No one's oil's about $5 to $7 overpriced. Now it's a 10-15% war premium on oil right now, but I don't believe it in the gold market. I don't believe it in the bond market. The dollar is strengthening here. That'll tell you everything you need to know. Bond yields are under control. Gold is getting sold. It's not a war premium. Gold's down in the 1310s, for Christ's sake. Dollar liquidity is starting to dry up. Kind of sounds like what I've been saying for months now, that we're going to get a bottom in the dollar. Gold is not going to break out. The U.S. Treasury market is not going to cross the red line on the 10-year bond, 3.05%. Yeah, Joanne, you bring up another interesting point. Yes, defense contractor stocks were down over $10 billion. They lost over 1.3% on average on Friday. I don't know what they're doing today. I haven't looked if there's been follow-through action to the downside. I'm sure that there's a lot of people trying to gin the war premium back up, right? But worse than that is you got to watch the oil markets. You got to watch oil, you got to watch gold, you got to watch the currency market, because that's where the real capital flows. That's where the real opinion on this situation takes place. But again, the central banks are in there massaging all of this shit anyway, in order to try and keep everybody from getting upset. So, because they don't want to look like they've lost they've lost control of the situation either. You got to remember that it's all confidence game. Banking is a confidence game. So is politics. Confidence game. All of it. I mean that sincerely. And at this point, everybody is worried about their own optics. They're scared to death. Trump doesn't. Trump, I don't know where Trump is on this. I know he wants peace, but I also fundamentally believe that he wants to see Iran ground under the Western heel. I really fundamentally believe that. That's what has me worried. If I fundamentally believed that Donald Trump respected Persians and Iran in any way at all, I wouldn't be as worried as I am right now. I don't believe that. I believe that's why he has the worst war hawks imaginable in his cabinet. I believe he thinks this bullshit is real, that Iran is the biggest state sponsor of terrorism in the world. Just complete fucking nonsense. We are. All right, I'm done. You guys have a great afternoon. We'll talk tonight. Periscope at 9 o'clock tonight. We're going to cover a lot of the same things. This is not going to be that much more to talk about, but it's a slightly different audience. So for those of you who tuned in this morning, your evenings are free. I'm not going to do anything new. And then tomorrow night, Halsey Live, going to discuss Israel in depth. Really important. So thank you guys for tuning in. This has been the Golden Goats and Guns 45 minutes on YouTube Live. You can follow me over at goldgoatsandguns.com. You can follow me on Twitter, TFL178. And you can support my work in a variety of places linked below in the chat, as well as support my work over at Patreon, which would be a really great vote of confidence for the work that I do. Thank you very much. You guys have a great afternoon. We'll talk soon.